All right, so happy Friday, Aquarius season. Very excited. I'm an Aquarius, so this is a season I celebrate. It is my mother's birthday today as well, so today is a fun day for me. And I noticed that tomorrow there is the moon is going to be conjunct the north node, and I believe at the same time the sun is going to be standing at the bendings of the nodes. So we have absolutely oh, thanks, Abigail. I'll pass that on. My mom is exactly the type to love happy birthday greetings from complete strangers, and she'd give them back as well. I mean, she's just, hyper sociable. Everybody loves her. But yeah, so tomorrow we've got some interesting nodal configurations with the two luminaries. And I thought, well, this might be a good time to talk about the nodes. And also, we're kind of near Chinese New Year, and I'm very strongly connecting today the imagery that we have with the lunar nodes and dragons. And so, there's a little bit of a theme that's probably developing. I'm realizing my light is not fantastic, and I've just upgraded to this very swanky setting where I can turn the lights on with my with my phone. So hopefully that will help a little bit. Right, so today we're going to talk about the nodes. I've never given a lecture on the nodes before, never really spoken about them in isolation before. However, it has been over the last 7 years, probably one of the most consistent questions that I've received is, what do I do with the nodes? What do we think about this? What do we think about this? And I'm going to tell you 9 times out of 10, there's a temptation to overemphasize the nodes. Or to overthink them, try to make them something bigger than they need to be. And that can be a bit of a struggle. I want to talk about that a little bit today. And the whole presentation is just loaded with examples back and front. We won't go into super deep detail with every one of them. That's not really the point today. The point today is to understand where the nodes contribute to the development of a story. I want to start by saying that if you're not on my mailing list, I hope you would consider joining it. You can go to this website, brooklynmessenger.com. This is where I am routinely, or I hope to have more up here by now, but there's quite a lot that's been on my desk over the last couple of weeks, but things are going to start zeroing out soon, and I'll be able to return my attention back to writing. However, if you're not on my mailing list, I hope you would consider joining. You can go here and you can get a little bit of a taste of some of the kind of content that you'll be seeing. I've got some exciting things coming over the next couple of months when I can find some time. The headlines every day are bringing these kind of themes together about what's going on with the navies, what's going on with big corporations, what's going on with monopolies, how that's impacting business in the US, in the Eurozone, in China, in the Austro-Pacific region. So, there's a lot to kind of talk about, and who knows where we'll start. But today we're going to open up on a conversation about the nodes. I'm aware that maybe not everybody joining us today is going to have a very robust understanding about what the nodes are. So I'm just going to give a very quick explanation about what the nodes are. Let's imagine that we have the sun, and this line is what we call, does anybody know what the name of that line is? It's the path that the sun moves down. The apparent path of the sun has a special name. Ecliptic, yes, precisely.
Sorry, should I leave stuff in the chat box or
no, Matthew, it's
okay.
fine. This is no, it's great. Yeah, unmute yourself anytime. I much prefer audio also, because there's a delay with the chat. It takes people time to to type, so it's also nice to hear. Yeah, so this is the ecliptic. We imagine that the sun is moving throughout the zodiac in a straight line. The moon's passage is not. It's broadly following the ecliptic. All of the 7 planets move along this line, but only the sun, because this is the sun's path, because what's really being mapped here is the Earth's orbit around the sun. But from our point of view, it's the sun that appears to be revolving around us. And the sun is the one that's really at the heart of Western astrology. It defines everything that we do. It is the sun that has defined the part of the sky that we chose to take constellations from to form a zodiac in the first place. So we've got this line that the sun travels, but the other planets and the luminary, the moon, they don't follow exactly on that line. Sometimes they move a little bit north and a little bit south, and they waver a bit. And these points here, these points of intersection where on the moon's path, she comes and makes an intersection with the ecliptic. These are what we call the nodes. And the word node should give you an indication that what we have is two or more things coming together, because that's what a node is. It's, you know, this combination of different influences that are joining at a particular place. So here we have the north node shown in the middle. The north node is that place where the moon in her path intersects with the ecliptic on a northward journey. So you can see that the moon is principally moving south on this side, and that's where we've got the south node here and here. When the moon is on this downward southern moving path, that intersection is what we call the south node. And the north node is where the moon is again moving into a state of ascent. And you know, there's been so much imagery that really surrounds the story of the nodes. Historically, the one that we hear the most in most cultures, there seems to be some appreciation for there being a dragon, you know, around, you know, conceptualized by the node, so that the north node would be called the dragon's head, and the south node would be called the dragon's tail. So in, you know, Renaissance texts, for instance, you get the Latin cauda draconis, which is the dragon's head. And the word for tail is escaping me now. Of course it is, because I tried to impress you guys with my knowledge of Latin. But at any rate, you've got this imagery, this very stark imagery that connects back to this image of a dragon. That's cauda. Yeah, well, then what's the head? Caput. Of course, I said cauda for the head, and that's why I got myself backwards. So it's caput draconis, which is the dragon's head, and then cauda will be the tail. Thank you, Matthew. Now, I just want to show you, you know, something very quickly that, you know, relates back to this image of the dragon. So this is a visualization that comes from the Astronomy for Astrologers course. So, you know, if you're interested in learning a bit about astronomy, you know, come talk with me and we can get you set up on an upcoming course if that's of interest to you. We'll talk more about that at the very end. But this is a graphic that's demonstrating what's called precession. It is a very, very, very slow process that takes like 24,000 years. And what's happening is that the Earth's North Pole is slowly oscillating in this circle, which is causing the first point of Aries and the first point of Libra to move very, very slowly over time. And what you'll notice is that there's this circle that gets drawn by the Earth's North Pole. So this line here, you know, if we just go ahead and take ourselves back for just a moment, you can see that this circle was being drawn. And now we're going to watch what happens with the pole. Over the course of, you know, very slow process, thousands of years, you'll see that the North Pole starts to trace this circle up in the heavens. And this is where the North Pole is pointing right now, right on the star Polaris. And, you know, you can see that maybe about 2,000 years ago, or sorry, 4,000 years ago at 2000 BC, it was between these two stars. 2,000 years ago, the North Pole didn't point at any star as part of a major constellation. You know, it pointed between constellations. 2000 AD, which is, you know, more or less right now, we've got Polaris being pretty close to where the North Pole is pointing now. But as this circle gets traced, you know, what you might notice is that there is a giant dragon that stands right in the center of the cosmos, you know, from the point of view of Earth. So let's go ahead and go back for just a moment. You can see this constellation here is called Draco, and it's this giant dragon constellation right at the center. And the North Pole just circles around this dragon over and over again. So there's, you know, anciently been an association that at the beginning and ending of the world, there is this there is a dragon or a draconic or serpent-like entity that is, kind of safeguarding the beginning and end of all things. So it's not terribly surprising, with the reputation that the nodes have gotten over time, that there would be this association with dragons. And so, it doesn't really matter where, in this precession arc we are, there's always going to be, up near our North Pole, the constellation of Draco. So let me pull back. There we go. So when we're talking about, the North Node and the South Node, we are going to be building on the imagery related to a mouth and a tail. We're building to this imagery of a primal force. The image of the dragon, it has such deep mythological roots. You can see the image of the dragon show up in every culture around the world in different forms, sometimes feathered, sometimes winged or not winged, sometimes with legs, no legs. That it changes based on where you are in time and where you are on the globe. So we have the North Node and we've got the South Node. And anciently, the further back you go, you start to see language where the North Node is associated with this understanding of augmentation or increase. Because remember that the North Node is that part of the moon's cycle where she's moving northward in her journey. Her latitude is increasing. And so from the vantage point of Earth, if we're, looking up and seeing night after night, the moon appear to climb and appear to raise in latitude, then we have an association here that the North Node it increases something. And authors might say, that with the fortunate planets, it increases the good of those planets. With the malefic planets, it increases the evil that they might portend. And then with the South Node, we have this idea of diminishment and decrease. With the South Node, we're pulling down, we're moving downward. And so we start to see things taper off, things start to close down. Now, I'll tell you that I'm not entirely on board with North Node conjunct a malefic planet increases the malevolence of that planet. I think I'm kind of more of the opinion that this is about a building up and a building down, and it really is more contextual than that. But we're certainly talking about increases and decreases. And, that theory, that image, it even makes its way into this table. Now, I don't know, this is just borrowed from an image online, the table of the essential dignities of the planets according to Ptolemy. And you will notice that in this table that Lilly gives us, this is, coming from Lilly, that there are these two, placements for the exaltations of the nodes, such that Gemini becomes the exaltation of the North Node. Sagittarius becomes the exaltation of the South Node. So what's that about? Because when you think about historical application of this table, where we see it used in natal astrology, horary astrology, mundane astrology, I don't know that I've ever noticed a historical author make reference to the North Node being in Gemini and being especially powerful or fortunate because of its exaltation in this degree. It doesn't seem to be something that's put into use, but there is, I believe, a reason for them being placed in these locations. And I just want to tell you, I don't know this, I haven't read this anywhere. This is me using what I know about astronomy to kind of fill in some gaps that have been left for us. So let me show you what I think the origin of this particular idea is. I've got this image here that comes from the introduction of Manilius's Astronomica. So this is the work of the publishers. It's from the Loeb Classical Library. I'm pulling it from this lovely red volume of Manilius here, Marcus Manilius. And there are a number of circles here that you can see. So if we're starting with the Earth at the center, we've got the equator here in the middle. We've got the summer tropic up in the north. And this is where, when the sun, so this is the ecliptic path, this thing that's a little bit, cockeyed, because the Earth's equator and the sun's path, which is the ecliptic, they're not perfectly aligned. They are offset currently by about 23.5 degrees. That is variable. I don't know that people talk about this much, but that degree of how far that axial tilt is variable. It doesn't stay at a static 23.5 degrees. It takes something like 40,000 years for there to be a shift. So that's why we don't talk about it. It's like effectively, it doesn't happen in a way that we can see. But the moon's orbit around the Earth jostles and oscillates the axial tilt, and so that can change by up to about 2 degrees. So it can go from anywhere from like 21 degrees to like 23 degrees, so there's this oscillation that happens there. But as the sun moves north in his journey, where he reaches his uppermost point, this forms the beginning of Cancer, 0 degrees of Cancer. And so this circle represents that place where the sun is at its highest declination. And conversely, when the sun is moving in its southward direction and hits its most southerly point, we're looking at the beginning of the zodiacal sign Capricorn. And the winter tropic, which might also be called the Tropic of Capricorn, is that circle which, on the Earth's parallels of latitude, that if you extended it out into space, it intersects with 0 degrees of Capricorn. So it lines out the place where the sun is going to be on the winter solstice, on the darkest day of the year. And at these points, the sun kind of hovers for a little while, and then it changes direction. All of this time it's been climbing, and then once it hits 0 degrees of Cancer, it seems to freeze or hang in the air for about 3 days, and then it wings back down on its southern journey. Same thing happens down here, where we freeze on the southern end of things, and then we start to turn back around. It's where we get the origins for the mythology, for instance, about around that Christmas time, this idea of things being buried for 3 days and then resurrected and coming back. It's just a story about what's happening with the sun and its journey. Very ancient mythology. But let's bring this back to a conversation about the nodes. I mean, the nodes, remember, are mapping the points of increase, decrease in terms of latitude, where we're starting to experience more northern journey and versus a southern journey. And Gemini is that sign where it is the final bit of the northern passage for the sun. When the sun enters Gemini, it's at the last stretch of its northbound journey. Okay. And so, the North Node ends up finding its exaltation here. And similarly, Sagittarius is the last part of the southern journey. I mean, once the sun enters into Capricorn, it's already beginning to move north. So it wouldn't really be appropriate to associate, that Capricorn kind of energy, perhaps with what, this idea of climbing downward, that's no longer happening to the sun. Now, really, the actual parallel to the nodes, the lunar nodes are talking about that place where the moon crosses the sun's path on the northbound journey or the southbound journey. So the true parallel would actually be 0 degrees of Libra and Aries, because this is where the sun is midway in its journey, just like what the nodes represent, midway on the northbound journey. This would be the actual the metaphorical parallel, or symbolic parallel with the sun's journey. The issue, though, is that Aries and Libra are already accounted for, and they have this very ancient associations stretching, very far back into Babylonian history. And so, the sun's exaltation being in Aries and Saturn's exaltation in Libra, that those positions are occupied. And similarly, you wouldn't be able to use the tropical signs of Cancer and Capricorn, because these two are also accounted for with Jupiter and Mars. So, the only real option left that still imparts something about, the northern kind of image, the northern journey, is going to have to be that final bit of the northern ascent, where the sun becomes more and more northern. And similar with Sagittarius, things become more and more southern. So anyway, we're not going to focus much on that table. I just wanted to quickly say that I think that there is reason for why Gemini and Sagittarius are associated with the nodes, but I also don't know that it's been used or demonstrated. There's no end to the number of schemes and systems that you can create. You could create your own system of dignities right now that would have, almost as much logic. Just create whatever logic you like, but the real key is, does it bear out in interpretation? And that's the piece of the puzzle that stays good question in my mind. As we move out of the Persian Arabic period, and we start to move into European Middle Ages, the Renaissance period, we start to move away from this more nuanced language of augment, diminish, increase, decrease, and instead we start to just see the North Node taking on the signification of being a good point, or a fortunate place, whereas the South Node might occupy the opposite perspective, where we're dealing now with an evil point, or a place which is less fortunate. Both of these, I think that what we're looking at is somewhere in the middle, and it's kind of like a 3D image, those like magic books where you like look at this image and this detail and you can't really see what's there, but if you relax your eyes for a little bit, something begins to form. It's kind of, I think, what's happening here, where if you don't hold too tightly to an expectation that it needs to be, this expectation versus this expectation, it's probably going to be a little bit easier to work with the nodes. I think people struggle with the nodes because they try to make them far bigger than they need to be. They want them to be, these big points of karma, fate. What part of the astrological heavens that we are measuring is not wrapped up in this thing that we call fate? So, I don't know why these nodes, but again, it's this building of this image of the dragon too, that there is something that is so primal and very much centered in our understanding of our cosmological origins that are probably being pulled in here. And of course, when the sun and moon are together on the nodes, there's an eclipse, and there's quite a lot of drama that's been played out over the nature of eclipses throughout human history and what they portend, and the vulnerabilities that they expose humanity to. I'm going to, for this presentation, encourage you to just make the nodes more accessible. Just, bring them back to earth. They don't need to be a whole, spiritual, what's the word that I want to use? Belief system. I struggle with the idea of reincarnation. I'll tell you, I hear about the nodes, and I was raised in the Northwest, where evolutionary astrology was really big. It was one of the first forms of astrology that I was exposed to in the wild, and there was a lot of emphasis on reincarnation and the soul's purpose, and the nodes reflecting karma that's inherited, and building all these kind of things. And I struggle with the idea of reincarnation personally. I think that is humanity's attempt at resolving its fear of its own mortality. The idea that there is a permanent end to physical existence for an individual soul is something that is quite hard to wrap one's head around. And so reincarnation can be a very powerful tool in extending our own spiritual exploration of the purpose of life. And that's definitely true. But I also find that when you make these points that big, they can be difficult to interpret. So we're going to bring this a little bit closer to Earth. One of the things that seems so consistent with the nodes is that we're talking about themes related to height, to elevation, to things that are ascending or descending. Remember that the nodes themselves, they are marking a place that is connected to an ascent or descent. Historically, the north node might be called the ascending node, and the south node might be called the descending node. Right. So with height and elevation, we might be talking about things related to staircases. We might be talking about elevators. We might be talking about mountains or deep caves. We might also be talking about things like stumbles and falls. I have recently, made friends with, is she a client? Is she, I mean, she's more a friend, I think. And, she's come through with a recent story about her mother's recent fall. So here's the chart of when her mother fell. And take a look at the position of the nodes. I mean, you've got the south node bang up there on the midheaven. And in terms of falling, it's the south node that you would want to be associating with falls. The north node doesn't have that same kind of association. It's more about climbs or things moving upward with effort. Nothing moves up without effort. You can fall with absolutely no help. Gravity will ensure that for you, but you can't climb without putting effort in. So there's a bit of a difference in, and we'll talk about that in just a moment. But right now, I mean, just take a look at the astrology here. I mean, this was a fall that happened. You remember that full moon that was conjunct Mars, in opposition to this, there's a Sun-Mars opposition. And the injury, if I remember correctly, ended up being around the shoulders, arms, this upper part of the body, the parts of the body that you would expect to be shown by Gemini. And the mother had her sun at 17 degrees of Gemini. Her Jupiter was at 14 Virgo, and her Mars is at 16 Virgo. So what's happening here is there's this giant T-square that's getting activated in her nativity by this full moon that's building and crescendoing. And so, you can tell by the moon Mars conjunction opposition to the sun, this the mother was born in the 30s, and so she's definitely advanced in years, and a configuration like this is unlikely to be something that's just going to be an inconvenience. This is probably going to be something that's going to be a real challenge to the body, a real difficulty to be overcome. And the nature that this particular challenge took when the south node came to the midheaven was a fall. Thankfully, if you're interested, she's very much on the mend. She was moved out of the ICU, I think, probably a week after the fall, and then was in another facility for some time. But from what I understand, she is on the recovery route now, which is great. But this example is just to very quickly illustrate, this role that the south node is playing up here on the midheaven. Okay, so, I'm interested in the way that the nodes, they seem to come in where there's a story of height, elevation, difference in height and elevation, things climbing, things falling, things of that nature. But there's also a focus about the north node and south node in a way reflecting the degree to which we resort and fall back to our base nature, or we challenge ourselves to take a different path. The south node has strong associations with the kind of choices that we make almost on autopilot, things that we do by default. They tend to be things that are easy for us, things that are very familiar. They don't require a lot of effort, but usually we will experience some kind of disappointment or frustration on the back of that, because the south node isn't just something that's easy and habitual for us. It's also the kind of habits that stir up problems for ourselves. But the north node is a place where you are encouraged to adopt a completely different perspective. You almost have to stand into a different understanding of yourself. and pull yourself into a different place, to be able to pull down the positive significations of that point. Joanna, go ahead and unmute yourself. I see that yeah.
Hi, yeah, I just wanted to say about you just put up that chart for the Mother's Fall.
Yeah, hold on, let me put it back up. I can put it back up. There you go.
I had a fall myself on the 26th of December, and I just threw up the chart for the time. And it has the South Node right on the midheaven in exactly the same place.
Yeah, of course it does. Of course it does. I wonder if I can just quickly, you're still seeing, correct me if I'm wrong, but you're still seeing my my screen, my PowerPoint,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
Okay. I'm wondering if, would you be willing, if I was to show my software, would you be willing to show the class that chart? Is that okay?
Oh yeah, for sure.
Okay. I'm sorry about your fall, by the way. I didn't mean to
Oh no,
laugh.
it's all right. But it was it was my neck and everything as well, exactly the same.
Wow. Okay. So you said it was the 22nd of December.
Yeah.
And when was this? What time?
8:30 in the morning.
And then, is it Kenmare?
Yeah, Kenmare in Ireland, yeah.
So let's have a look. Yeah, bam, right up there on the midheaven. Yeah.
Oh, have you got the right time? Because I have
8:30 a.m. It might
Is
be
it taking an hour?
It could be. Sometimes it does something a little bit silly with the time zone, so it's possible that this is what was supposed to be configured. Is it?
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, that's quite yeah, wow. And you had an issue with, you said, on the neck, is that what you said?
Yeah, neck, shoulders, back.
You've got that exact same, moon Saturn opposite, or sorry, moon Mars opposition. That's quite striking. And yeah, well, thank you. That lends a little bit of credibility to what I'm talking about.
Oh yeah,
today.
totally. I was shocked when I put it up. I was like, oh my God, there it is.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about the nodes is that they're, especially when they're on angles, they present themselves in a way that's very easy to see. So yeah, with the North Node, South Node, there's something about behavioral distinction that's important to recognize. Also, we are dealing with the head of a dragon and the tail of the dragon. So there's also going to be some imagery about consumption, but also purging, or, to move things, out of the system, to push them out. So, I'll give you an example. When we're talking about the North Node, I had a client who had a fear that she was overeating, and that it was the result of her struggling on the back of a committed relationship that had ended because her partner had abused her trust in a way that was impossible to reconcile. And what was shown in the astrology was a conjunction. The ascendant ruler was conjunct the North Node, and part of the story that she was explaining was this, this feeling of like, it is just eating yourself into a place where your body feels so full that there's not room for, a whole lot else. So there's a little bit of that can come with the North Node. Of course, with the South Node, there can be, images of purging. I want to show you an example. This is Callie. This is my roommate's dog. She's a very sweet dog. She's an Aquarius like me. Her birthday's any day now. I don't remember when it is, but it's coming up pretty soon. And there was, we had a little bit of a fright a couple weeks after we got her. So she was born in either late January, early February, and she came to live with us. I believe it was in late March, maybe it was in April, can't remember. But on the 1st of May, we were having some very serious concerns about her welfare and well-being. She was vomiting nonstop. She was very unwell, weren't quite sure what was going on. And, I don't do a whole lot of astrology for myself, but I will for my dogs, So I opened up the software to kind of get some understanding about whether or not, because dogs throw up all the time. I've had dogs for years and years, and I've noticed that when my dogs start coughing or throwing up, everyone around me freaks out. And I just think, it's not really that big of a deal. But this was, she was a baby and it was my roommate's first dog. And I didn't want to be the guy who was like, oh, don't worry about it. It's all going to be fine. It's not a big deal. I wanted to make sure that, is this really something that's quite serious? And let me show you the real, kicker here is this conjunction, the moon to the north node. And does anybody have any thoughts as to, what might have been going on with this dog at that time? What might have been part of the problem, why she was throwing up endlessly? She extreme sensitivity. Yeah, actually there was sensitivity. She had been overeating. She was overeating her food, eating too much. And it turned out that what she was eating, she was allergic to. And this is how we found out that she's allergic to chicken. So there was a little bit of a problem that we had to navigate. But ultimately, this was not going to be a situation where we expected things to be too violent or too terrible. There is a moon square the sixth ruler, but the fact is that the sixth ruler is in its own house. It's in its own sign. Health and vitality is strong. There's no, negative indications arguing death. I mean, the worst thing that's happening is this moon in square to Saturn. The moon's above the earth, it's conjunct the north node, and what she was doing was vomiting. She was purging from the mouth, purging from the dragon's head in a way. And so you can kind of see the symbolism coming out in that image. So, beyond the consumption and purging part of the story, there's also an image with the North Node and South Node about wise choices versus mistakes. Now, I found this out because of the role the South Node was playing in the consultations that I was having over the course of a couple of years. I began to notice that when there was a conjunction with the South Node, or the South Node was in the midheaven or on the ascendant, the entire situation was predicated on a massive mistake that the querent felt that they had made. Now, they didn't always want to word it that way. Sometimes they said, well, I don't know if it was a mistake, but by the end of the consultation, we really get to this place where, yeah, you're right. I wasn't really stepping into my own strength. I wasn't thinking about what was right for me. I kind of just defaulted into this choice. It was a bad thing to have done. I didn't put any thought into it, and repercussions immediately followed. The South Node is so, if there's nothing else you remember beside, the things that I would really want to pass on in terms of the nodes are height, elevation, ascent, descent, up, down, all of that. And then this idea of doing the right thing and doing the thing you wish you didn't do. I mean, those are, hyper, super relevant. Now, I want to, if you're on your mailing list, you might have already seen this story. This is quite an interesting story about something that happened in August of 2004 in Chicago. So the short story is that the Dave Matthews Band was on tour. It was scheduled for a 2-night set in Chicago, and a driver for the band emptied their septic tanks on a bridge and dumped over 800 pounds of human waste into the Chicago River. But the real problem was that just at that exact moment, a tourist boat called Chicago's Little Lady was passing under that same bridge. And I'm going to spare you the account that was shared. But it was pretty bad. The human waste went into passengers' eyes, mouths, hair, onto clothing, personal belongings. They came out soaked. Some of the passengers suffered nausea and vomiting as a result of this exposure to human waste. I mean, it was quite a dramatic little story. Now, when you take a look at this, I mean, Abigail says this is horrible. Now, this is the chart for when that tourist boat set sail. So it was probably about 10 minutes later. I think it was at like 1:08 p.m. I can't remember if I'm getting my numbers right. But this was when that particular tourist boat set sail. We've got the South Node on the ascendant and South Node in Scorpio. Now, think about the relevance of human waste and the falling of human waste over a bridge that's being displayed here by the South Node in Scorpio. There's like such strong reinforcing themes here. Now, interestingly, the moon is in Taurus, it's exalted. So whenever we have a planet exalted that's configured in a particular way, what we have is an image of heights, the moon being in Taurus is it's pointing to something that's up, coming from up, and the moon is separating from this contact to Saturn, Saturn being the natural ruler of feces and waste. In natal astrology and medical astrology, we talk about Saturn ruling the melancholic temperament and the humor that's associated with it, which is black bile. Another word for that would be waste. So the moon is separating from that Saturn and immediately applying to the square of Mars, which ruled the ascendant, which would signify the passengers. And so what we have is the moon moving from Saturn to hit this square with Mars. I mean, just nightmare scenario. But what's interesting about this is, Dave Matthews, he had nothing to, I want to just say, I'm not a fan of Dave Matthews, but I don't want him to get the blame for this. It was somebody who was managing the tour bus who did this. But he had nothing to do with the incident. He himself was undergoing a nodal return at the time that this happened. His nodes were coming back and making a natal transit. And at the time of the incident, 11 degrees of Scorpio was rising, and Dave Matthews' own natal south node is 12 degrees of Scorpio. So this, this south node was transiting his south node. His natal south node was rising over the ascendant at the time that this happened. So it's quite an interesting. What I love about this example is it ticks all the boxes. If we go back here, height, elevation, yes, check. Base nature, I think that I could make an argument that the person was not really putting a lot of thought into what they did when they emptied that. They ended up paying hundreds, I think it was hundreds of thousands of dollars to settle with the city for that. It was like a real financial drain on the Dave Matthews Band, as an organization essentially. And it was a bit of a pickle. And I think that the tour bus driver who made this decision would probably agree that he might have been used to making quick, fast decisions and not being terribly thoughtful, and maybe this one is not tick. But purging, yeah, we can say that. Mistake, yeah, we can say that's definitely part of the story. I have another example here to talk about. I've had a couple of consultations over the course of my career with querents or with clients. Sometimes they're not horrors, they're just discussions, astrological discussions about friendships that are very painful. Abigail says, I have the South Node in the 7th. Every one of my relationships was definitely a mistake. I have the South Node in the 10th, and I have a particular skill at tarnishing my own reputation by opening my mouth, So that South Node is a very real, it's a real influence. It's a real strong kind of theme. And Anna's asking, do you fall frequently? I don't know if that question is for me or for somebody else, but no, but I am clumsy. I'm definitely clumsy, but I can't say that I've had the fall yet. But get back to me when I'm in my 60s, 70s, 80s. I might have a couple more things to share with you, or maybe I fall long before that and don't even make it that far. So this consultation came from a client who was struggling with a friendship. It's a difficult chart. What was really going on here was a sense that this friend, they had been best friends for years, but suddenly this friend now was starting to not tell the truth, say that he was doing this when he was really doing this other thing over here at that time, or that he went out with so-and-so when he really didn't go out with so-and-so. He went out to go hang out with these other people. Just bizarre little things where it's like, why would, you lie about this? And then over time, the client was also expressing that like there was no communication. It was like he had fallen off the face of the earth. You were constantly getting the runaround. We used to talk every single day. We would text all day long. And now like I can't even get a reply back. We message on Instagram and he'll say, oh, I'm never on here. Text me. And then you text him and he doesn't, it's like all this kind of back and forth. And the question was whether or not, it was time to break up with this friend. Essentially, whether or not there was a likelihood of being able to restore things, bring things back to a state of peace. So let's take a look at this together. Which planet is going to be the significator of my client?
Sun?
Correct. Yes, that's good. And Carol, it'll be the sun. We got 29 degrees rising on the ascendant. What do we think the relevance of a final degree is on the ascendant, given the nature of the question? Remember, we're talking about endings. We're talking about right. Yep.
Change.
Everybody say that again.
Change is going to happen.
Yes, there's something there's a development that's coming, but the real focus is not just a change, but it's a change that comes through the shape of an ending. If it was 0 degrees on the ascendant, it's change that's coming through a beginning. But this is about endings. Which planet signifies the querent? It'll be the sun. You can see that the sun is in Cancer. There's a very strong emotional response that my client is going through right now, dealing with this particular issue. And what planet is going to signify the friend? The moon. Perfect. If you had said Saturn because you wanted to use the 7th house, that would have been okay. But remember, if we can be more specific, we want to be more specific. And in this case, we can be more specific and say we're talking about a friend. So what do you think it's about the moon's position here? Moon being in Capricorn, moon opposite Mercury. How does that fit, what we've been told about this particular friend?
Mercury,
Abigail, I see you have unmuted yourself. What do you think?
Mercury can sometimes indicate deception or not telling the truth or not being completely straightforward.
Yeah. And then the moon in Capricorn, do you have any thoughts about, how this is describing the friend at this time?
The moon's a detriment.
Yeah. And so what does that mean?
Well, for me, I think it's just not being upfront, not being truthful, not being able to express their emotions or what they're really feeling.
Yeah. And what's really happening here is there probably are things that are going unsaid. The moon is under the earth and the sun is above the earth. There probably are things that are being unsaid, but the real focus here is that the moon is not being true to themselves. This person who's shown by the moon is in a position where they are causing damage to themselves, and making choices that are leading to a lack of trust. There's a very strong theme here with the moon Mercury opposition that what is said cannot be relied on. When we talk about whether or not rumors are reliable or what we're told from a report that's made its way to us, when we've got a hard contact between the moon and Mercury, it's very consistent that what we're dealing with is information that is corrupted in some way. And this is the way that this individual was handling themselves broadly, is through this theme of corrupted information, intentionally misleading. There's a lot of dark symbolism that's being shown there. Now, what's the significance of the sun being in the 11th and in Cancer? What do you think my client was doing at this time?
In the 11th, it's the house of friendship too. So he was focusing on the friendship in a very emotional way.
Yeah. And it's, to me, I'm thinking, the sun in Cancer, you are, putting yourself more or less, you're accommodating too much. You are disposed by the moon, you're in the 11th house. There's a sense that you are rationalizing everything that this person is doing as, no, it's okay that this is happening because XYZ. And then what ends up is, so as the client was sharing with me what was going on, I could very clearly hear between the language that, but where are you standing up for yourself in this? Where are you expecting that your friendships should be friendships. Where are you expecting that you should be told the truth? Where are you expecting, I wasn't hearing it. What I was hearing was every excuse as to why this, particular friend should be excused from having to behave the way that other friends are expected to behave. So it was, it was an interesting kind of consultation in terms of taking a look at, the moon's placement and the sun's placement and figuring out, so what do you think? Do you think that this is a friendship that is likely to remain in place, or do you think this is a relationship that's in the process of breaking down?
I would say that the sun, because it rules Leo, would expect some loyalty.
Yes, I think that the sun in general is definitely going to expect loyalty. Maureen, do you have an idea about whether or not the relationship, this friendship looks like is it savable from what you can see, or does it look like it's in the process of breaking down?
I think it's downhill.
Yeah, the moon's next aspect is in opposition to the sun. I mean, there is this trine with Uranus, but does Uranus bring people together? No, it does not. Uranus is a separative force. It is a divisive influence. It breaks things apart, breaks things down. And the next aspect we have is an opposition between the sun and the moon. And it's a very clear image here that this is going to be a real challenge, and it's going to be hard. But the north node's on the midheaven. So where do you think the consultation? Let's bring this back to our nodal discussion. Think about the themes that we talked about with the nodes. Where does this north node on the midheaven point us in terms of consulting? What kind of advice does the astrology suggest I need to be relaying at this time to my client?
That would be the good decision to break up, to end the relationship.
Yes, exactly. It's a north node conjunct Uranus, that this is hard. It's going to be difficult, but what you're doing is you are making yourself small. It's very easy for you to push yourself down, to subdue yourself, to make 1.5 million excuses to keep this friend in your life. But what's the good of that? What is this about, really? How do you feel about actually keeping this person, knowing, if nothing were to change in the future, and this is how this person is going forward, is that going to be okay by you? And we, slowly throughout the, stage of the consultation began to realize that this was actually a broader theme that was going on in the client's life about learning how to, not receive low levels of disrespect, maybe from friends or from romantic partners, maybe, or things that are going on in the professional sphere. So this became a consultation about reorienting ourselves and having new expectations about what a friendship is and what it can look like. And let me see, I've got a couple of questions here. Sheila says, perhaps the moon receives the sun, so perhaps some willingness to engage. Well, the sun doesn't apply to the moon, so there's no reception here. Remember, Sheila, that for there to be reception, you need to apply. And here the sun doesn't apply to the moon, so the moon can't receive. It's like, the sun has to actually pick up the phone and dial the phone number and get on the phone, but the sun's not the faster moving planet, the moon is. And so what this actually says is not a willingness to engage, but that the moon is going to continue to impress what it wants onto the sun, that there's not going to be an accommodation here coming from the other perspective, that this is going to be focused very much on what the moon person wants, what the friend wants. Would you look at the fact that the moon is on her way to the deepest point in terms of southern latitude, that the moon is moving south? I think there's a lot to say about the fact that, the north node's on the midheaven, but the south node is in the 4th house. It's right on the 4th house cusp. At the root of this is a series of choices that have resulted in, unstable friendships, friendships of convenience, friendships that are, easily fall into place, but as a result might easily break apart as well. And what we've got is the moon signifying the friend. We've got a lot of things. South node angular, the moon is debilitated, the moon is moving south, so there's quite a lot that I think that you could be building on if you wanted to. Is this talking about the moon being in an exalted position at this time, which is not healthy in relation to the placement. No, the North Node in Taurus, of course, that is the moon's exaltation, but I wouldn't need to put those connections. I mean, every sign is somebody's exaltation. The sun is in Jupiter's exaltation, but I'm not going to, do anything about that except maybe say that Cancer is inherently generous, and so that's going to add something to the profile, and I think that when I think about Taurus, I think about hobbits, to be honest. I think about how, when the opening of the Lord of the Rings, when Bilbo Baggins says that all hobbits love, they have a good love of the earth. They love tilled land, and all they're looking for is a simple life with good friends and good earth and good food. It's so Tyrian. And when something about this kind of story was about, how important good friendships are, and that's such a simple component to life, but it's an essential one. And so I might have made a connection with that moon Taurus thing, but it was really, I didn't need to go there. I mean, at some stage the common sense took over. I had the astrology that validated what I needed to see, and then from there on out, it's like two human hearts trying to connect and really get to the bottom of why is this hurting so much, and how did we get here in the first place? Those kind of conversations. So I wanted to show this example to say, the South Node is easy because I can show a ton of South Node kind of stuff, and it's always like, oh, that was a mistake, that was a mistake, that was a mistake. And the North Node ones are harder because frequently I don't get clients coming to me when they've just made a great decision. I get them coming to me when they're in the process of, resolving something that's gone wrong. So I like this example for that. Now we're going to move to another example here, related to this individual. His name is Michael Peterson. I don't know if you recognize this man's face. Last summer, I found the HBO docuseries Staircase. Yes, Staircase, exactly. And it was starring Colin Firth and Toni Collette, and I'm a huge Toni Collette fan. Oh my goodness. So I thought, yeah, I'll watch anything with Toni Collette in it. And it's based on true events, and it's centered on the death of Kathleen Peterson and her husband's murder trial. You're terrible, Muriel. Yes, perfect, Matthew. Not everybody knows that quote. That's fantastic. And I'll just say, in Toni Collette's another moment of praise for her, if I could recommend two films that she was in. Knives Out, obviously, she was fantastic in the first Knives Out film that came out. I think it was in 2019. But if you like horror and suspense, Sixth Sense, the one with Bruce Willis and Haley Joel Osment or whatever, Toni Collette played the young boy's mother, which I had forgotten about. And that movie is still really, really quite strong, very excellent film. So yeah, if you're interested in a Toni Collette binge, I definitely would make sure that one's on the table. Okay, so back to the story. Here's the deal. The docuseries focused on how Kathleen Peterson, Michael Peterson's wife, was found at the bottom of the stairs with suspicious injuries on her head, and she died at the bottom of a staircase. And interestingly, Michael Peterson's first wife died in a similar manner, I believe in Germany, 2, maybe 3 decades prior. So Michael Peterson was branded the staircase killer. It's a very striking image. I want to walk you through some of the astrology in his chart. I mean, the number one thing is this Mars-Saturn conjunction right on the midheaven. Very loud, very focal, easy to see. You can see that it's in square. Saturn here is in square to the 7th house cusp. Remember, this is a man who killed 2 of his own wives. The 7th ruler is Jupiter. And you can see that the Moon-Jupiter conjunction here in the 11th house, okay, it is actually compressed between the malevolent contacts of both Mars and Saturn on the midheaven. The moon has separated from Mars and applies to Saturn. Jupiter's last aspect was a or its next aspect is going to be Mars applying by sextile, and Saturn is also applying by sextile. So Jupiter is entirely besieged here. And we've got this Gemini signature, which is again going to be pointing to doubles of things. And so it wasn't just one wife that was killed, it was two wives that he killed over the span of his life. But what's interesting to me, when I watched this, I thought there's no way that this man's called the Staircase Killer and the South Node is not somehow very strongly involved in his birth chart. And I want to walk you through exactly what was going on with this man. The South Node is in the 5th house, okay, in Aquarius. Now, remember that the nodes themselves already have an association with changes in height, the concept of up and down. By their very nature, they give this image of things moving in different directions, up or down. So a staircase naturally fits. So, you know, if you've got a missing object chart, for instance, and the nodes are very prominent, you know, that might be an indication that it was lost or to be found maybe near stairs or near something that can transport something from one elevation to another. But the South Node is in the 5th, and what we know about, or what we think we know about the death of Michael's second wife, Kathleen, was that she found out that he was having secret sexual affairs with men. Michael Peterson was married to a woman. He had not given any, you know, public indication of him actually being closeted homosexual. Maybe he was bisexual. I don't know and don't care. But the South Node being in the 5th, I mean, the problem really came from these lovers that he was, you know, having anonymous sex with, you know, in these kind of, you know, public spaces. You watch the documentary. I mean, there's a lot to kind of explore here. And interesting, I mean, one of the things that was really confusing to me was why this Jupiter moon conjunction was in the 11th house, because that should be a happy house. But of course, from the 7th, and the turned perspective from the 7th house, this is in Michael Peterson's wife's turned 5th. So there's a very strong 5th house kind of theme that's being shown. So the South Node, of course, is going to be pointing to staircases, but also Aquarius is going to be invoking images of staircases. The glyph for Aquarius, it looks like a staircase, it looks like mountains, it looks like rooftops, and that is what Aquarius points to. It points to places in the horizon, in the environment, which jut out from the background. It doesn't fit the rest of the, you know, the rest of the visual. So staircases, for instance, have a very sharp way of distinguishing themselves from the rest of a home environment. Same thing with, like, you know, maybe if you've got an open field, but there's, you know, these mountain peaks or very sharp dramatic hills that are, you know, jutting out from the landscape, that's the part of the horizon that would be attributed to Aquarius. Same thing with the roofs and shingles on roofs and the upper eaves of houses, all going to be associated with Aquarius. Okay, now Michael Peterson, when I first looked into this, I didn't have his birth time. I want to say that it turned out that Frank Clifford had it all this time. He was also very interested in this man's birth chart. And so he had asked the Vital Records Office in Tennessee for a copy of the birth chart and received it. I had done the same thing, actually. I had already sent out a letter asking to get confirmation of birth time. So I've got you know, a copy of it myself, and Frank Clifford's got the same time. So we now have a confirmed birth time for this man. And when we take a look, but before I had that, you know, it's in my nature to want to look at prenatal lunations, especially for people who receive international fame or are somehow put on a global landscape at some stage in their life, because the prenatal lunation, the bigger your life is, the more drawn into the public you are, the more a prenatal lunation is going to have to say something about your reality and what's going on. And I mean, take a look at what we have here. I mean, you've got the lunation is ruled by Mars. Mars is at 20 degrees of Gemini here. The moon is applying to Mars. It's in the 8th house. Uranus is exactly square to the 7th ruler. The moon is right on Michael Peterson's 8th house cusp. You know, all of this is just very, very loud, very prominent. But of course, he would become internationally known as the staircase killer. And he's got this prenatal lunation, has both nodes bang on the angles, okay, conjunct Pluto, and you know, the south node, of course, in Aquarius here. So there's some very striking imagery to be seen, you know, with this kind of symbolism. And what really gave me chills is when I looked at the birth chart for Kathleen Peterson. Now, Kathleen Peterson's birth time is not known. I have not written in for that. I don't know that I plan to, but look at this. Her north node shows she has a nodal inversion to Michael Peterson. Now, I want to make it clear that I don't mean to be suggesting that if you are in a relationship with somebody who's got a nodal inversion, that you can expect something as tragic and violent as this to show up in your lives. Of course, it's not like that. Michael Peterson was a killer, so this is how it manifested. You know, it didn't need to go that way. If you took the killing component out, they were having a lot of real financial problems. They were having a lot of trouble relating with each other. There were secrets that were not really shared with each other. You know, in terms of synastry, when you have this inversion of north node and south node, that can be really problematic by transit, especially because what we begin to experience is where the thing that lifts one person up brings another person down. And so what ends up having to be explored is ways in which the lifting up of one's choices is a purely independent thing. Astrology has a way, if there is a connection, you know, it's just the nature of how all things are connected. And, you know, there's a way. Joanna says, I don't recommend the nodal inversion, and I don't either. Tracy says, I was in relation with nodal inversion person, and that is interesting as it was problematic. And what brought that person up in relation of money brought me down. Yeah, I mean, it's going to show up one way or another, that there's this exchange of heights, and there's an exchange of, you know, positions of strength and positions of power. I think when we think about these nodal inversions, what's important is to remember that if you are in relationship with somebody like that, then this nodal inversion can't be the focus. You need to pull away from that and find the points of agreement somewhere else, because the reality is, we are all going to have bad synastry with people who are very close to us, you know, in our lives. I'm good friends with Lynn Bell. When we looked at each other's astrology, I mean, early in our friendship, we looked at each other's astrology, and anybody would have thought we would be so, you know, such bitter enemies taking a look at it. But actually, you know, those oppositions and those difficulties and the things that are like theoretically difficult ended up being the things that we love about our friendship. You know, we have very compatible perspectives, but different. You know, they're coming from being informed by different wisdom traditions, different perspectives, you know, and also life experiences. And so that's been a very fruitful friendship. So I just want to say, like, I don't want anybody, you know, reading this or watching this back thinking, oh yeah, nodal inversion, this is going to be a doomed relationship. But what it does suggest is that there are going to be very easy places for one or both of you to slip into habits that are potentially destructive for yourself or for the union. And so you just need to behave consciously. To the conscious mind, there's nothing that astrology, there's nothing that can hurt you, because you got two conscious people who are working with the difficulty. At the end of the day, if the relationship's not going to work, you two will consciously uncouple. It'll be fine. The problem is when we don't have awareness as to where these injuries are, where they're coming from, what shape, size they are, what the nature is. And so as a result, problems can easily materialize. Amreen, why don't you go ahead and step on forward? Hey.
Hi, yeah, it was pretty remarkable seeing the nodal inversion of the two.
Right.
First, because since we're the subject of synastry, if one person's nodes, let's say they're lunar nodes,
Mhm.
touch the angle of the other person, like the descendant, for instance, or the second house, does it mean that that there's a likelihood that there's going to be a relationship or some kind of a partnership?
Well, there's definitely going to be a pull. It's like magnets. So you are going to attract people whose astrology fits yours. And if it's the nodal axis in this case, then so be it. Sometimes it's Jupiter on an angle, sometimes it's their sun is on my moon. It could be anything. With the nodes in particular, when those hit angles, and this is important to remember, the north node gives, but the south node has to go somewhere. This isn't like Saturn, where it can be dignified and in a good house and suddenly it's a well-behaved planet. The south node doesn't have any modification. Neither of these have modification influences. They are what they are, and they show up where they're going to show up. And so where the north node dispenses hope and optimism, the south node is going to dispense a reminder of ways that you can slip into unhealthy patterns. I would need probably to work in hypotheticals are hard in these kind of contexts, because all it really sounds is like the same thing. You could just pick up a book off the shelf and read it, and it's about as true as anything else. But I think if I was to see, two individuals where there's a north and a south node, we probably would spend a little bit of time on that, because what it means is that the south node is going to either be in the first or it's going to be in the seventh. And I would want to have some conversation if it's on those angles. And I'd want to probably have some conversation about, the way that their relationship has manifested, the way it materializes. Do we feel supported? Do we feel lifted up? Or are we feeling like this relationship brings the hallmark of this is just like every other relationship that didn't work? And the thing is, we don't want to put too much emphasis on the nodes either. The reality is that the nodes are one of many different pieces of a puzzle. And so you want to keep your orbs tight. Abigail's just asked that question anyway, so that's good timing. I use an orb of like 3 to 5 degrees. I mean, 5 is even a little loose for me. So if we're going to talk nodes, if we're going to talk about, those things falling on angles, I kind of need them to be within, 3 to 5 degrees of the angle itself.
Thank you.
Shannon says, when you say the nodes are not modified, does that mean that they do not alter in strength by the angles? No, the angles bring everything to a position of prominence. What I mean by that is that there's the nodes don't become dignified. You know what I mean? They like the south node, for instance, if it's conjunct Jupiter, it brings problems through the shape of Jupiter. The north node conjunct Jupiter really quite lifts things up. That can be, but there's another issue with that. The north node is all about consumption and taking in. And I think I can make a very quick and easy case that capitalism and gentrification are the offshoots of an unbridled Jupiterian type of energy. And so you can have too much of a good thing, so it's going to depend on where these things fall, but the angles absolutely do things, bring things to a position of prominence. Most of us are not going to have nodes that are very dramatic, and that's just how it's going to be. Not everybody's got something major that needs to get kind of worked through with the nodes, but some folks will. So if you can keep your orbs tight, relevant house cusps, near planets, near angles, that's when I would probably bring my attention in and pay attention to what's going on with the nodes. Tracy says, I was going to say magnets for the nodes. Also, at the point of the relationship, I was thinking the nodes held together significance, as in evolutionary astrology. So in a way, I was not looking clearly at this. Lori says, what about nodes on the part of fortune, spirit, Chiron, outers, as opposed to personal traditional planets, fixed stars? I think at that point we're so deep into diminishing returns. If you mind the pun, diminishing, get it? Anyway, I think we're into a field of diminishing returns with those guys. I'm not saying that there's not something powerful that can be found, every now and again, you can really strike something quite magical, but most of the time that's probably not going to bring the headline. Now, if it was angular, and it fit the story, if somebody had the North Node on Chiron and then went about, suffered some kind of injury and then went on a lecture circuit to teach people about this particular illness or type of injury and whatever. Well, that is very clearly a North Node Chiron story. So if you can find the story, then there's something to develop. Okay, let's look at our final example today, and this one's really fun. So Lori says, Judith Hill says the part of fortune on the South Node mitigates negativity. Like I said, I the South Node for me it stirs up trouble. There's no, it's like where it goes, problems follow. And so I would think that would probably actually create more problems for the part of fortune, but that would be my take. Any book that specifically addresses nodal inversion. My twin and I had an inversion with our mom. The relationship was fine. My relationship was fine, but my twins was not. I'm not sure that I don't know that there should be a book on nodal inversion. Let me say that. It's not that big of a topic. It's probably that the thing is, it's just enough to set the stage, to explain a little bit, a little bit about what's going on. But there's going to be so much more. It's probably not going to be about the nodes itself. It'll probably be about the nodes and these 10 other things that are going off on the side, Barbara. So I'm not sure, but I know that the nodes have been very much talked about by evolutionary astrologers. And so Mark Jones, I'm sure, is like a wizard with the nodes. And remember, we're talking the lunar nodes. All the planets have their own nodes. They all make an intersection. Their paths in their orbit intersect with the ecliptic somewhere. And so there are positions, and they're not all in opposition to each other. The lunar nodes, they stand in exact opposition to each other. Jupiter's nodes, for instance, are only a couple signs away from each other because the orbit is not exactly even dipping into the ecliptic. So, there's a lot to explore here, I think I would say, and plenty of things to see. Let me see. Yeah, okay, let's go. Yeah, absolutely. I just didn't want to make it sound like I was discouraging you looking into this further. I just was saying I don't know that there probably is going to be a good, really dig in there to explore that. But I'm sure that this nodal inversion thing would be something Mark Jones would pick up, and I definitely would check him out. Okay, so this is a horary related to some missing jewelry. I'm going to tell you in full transparency that I ignored the nodes in this chart, and it's something that I won't be doing again. This was the chart that finally got me to like, all right, I'm ready to talk about the nodes now, because I have more than enough examples of seeing them in action that I can confidently say what they do, and I can also feel pretty confident in where they're not going to be reliably doing things. So this is a beloved horary for me. A client asked if I could help her find her gold jewelry. She wondered if they might have been stolen, perhaps by one of her cleaning staff, but she made the point that she'd never had problems with her household staff before. The chart is miserable for recovery. I mean, if you just take a look at this, the second ruler, Mercury, it's in the 12th house, it's combust. The moon is separating from it and applying to a malefic that's peregrine and in detriment in a cadent house. Saturn's on the angle, retrograde. This is not really looking fantastic for recovery. Following conventional rules anyway. So you can see that, I think I've already gone through the astrology well enough for us. And so much of this chart did actually seem to support theft. The moon making an application to Mars, Saturn being on the 7th cusp, all those things, point to theft potentially. However, I argued that with the cadent luminaries and the significators being cadent, that and all of them moving toward cadent planets, so you can see the moon's applying towards a cadent planet, Mercury, the second ruler, is applying towards a cadent planet. That what I suspected is that ambiguity and a lack of clarity was going to be the resounding theme. I told the querent that while theft couldn't be ruled out, I just wasn't comfortable naming the maid. I mean, there wasn't really, the sixth ruler's in the seventh and retrograde, sure, but there's no contact between the second ruler, Mercury, and the sixth ruler, Saturn. There's no contact between the moon and Saturn. And I kind of took the view that Saturn in the seventh was a warning against trying to name somebody. And so I avoided that. I just said, I'm not going, there's a possibility for theft here with the signatures, but I'm not feeling comfortable naming the maid, for instance, as being involved. But just that morning, I was looking through my copy of Christian Astrology. I was rereading, I was working on some material about missing objects. And for that day, on that day, there was a comment from Lily where he talks about when significators and missing object charts apply to a cadent planet, what happens is that the thing has been carelessly tossed aside, and that's how it came to be missing. And that reminded me, so when this chart came to me, it reminded me, there are a lot of different ways to work with cadent planets. And so I told the querent that what I was going to do is set aside for a moment the lens of theft. I was going to let's just assume for a moment that this hasn't been stolen, and instead take a look at the chart as if the entire chart is telling us where this place is. It's describing the location. That's what she wanted to know anyway. Where is my missing gold? And I'm glad that we did that, because that was the avenue that actually had something to reveal. One thing that bugged me about the theft theory, that there was just a little too much that was unexplained. I mean, the ninth house has such a very strong focus here. The moon's in the ninth, it's applying to a planet in the ninth. That planet also happens to rule the ninth. Mercury is applying to the ruler of the ninth. I mean, there's a very strong ninth house theme. And the querent, when I conveyed that, I was like, is there anything related to travel? And, she said that the gold had gone missing after she returned from a trip abroad. So Sheila, well done. Yes, the person had been traveling recently, and she couldn't find them where she expected to find them when she came back. And she swore that she didn't take the gold jewelry with her on her trip, because I kept trying to push that. I was like, I don't know. It's something related to this trip. There's something connected. She's like, I didn't bring it. I swear I didn't bring it. And at that point, I was like, okay, I trust you. You didn't bring it. But while we started unpacking this travel symbolism, we both agreed that a connection to luggage certainly seemed possible. The moon is in Venus's sign, it's in the ninth. There's this combination of things that carry women's things, and like luggage seems to fit this. And Virgo's on the cusp of the second. And when Virgo is involved, it's so reliable that we're dealing with something that's in a basket, something that can be closed, a cabinet, a drawer, it's something like this. So that seemed to me to be pointing to possibility of there being luggage involved. The moon's disposited by Venus, as I said, it's separating from Venus. So there's this, kind of image here about where women's things are kind of locked up. So I said it seems like there's something related to travel, and two arguments are here: that the jewelry is connected to clothing or feminine adornments of some kind. And I also relayed to her just very quickly that, the last time that I judged a missing horary where there was a Moon-Mars feature, a strong Moon-Mars feature, electricity was relevant. What we had was the missing object was right next to an outlet, and it was like hanging from it. In fact, it was something was plugged in, and it was a necklace that had gone missing, and it had fallen back from behind. And if I could just kind of try to give you an image of this, is my microphone. So it was like the necklace had hung like this. I don't even think you can see, but the necklace had hung like that on the part that had connected into the wall. So, the electrical outlet was actually a pretty, strong feature. And I said, last time I saw a Moon Mars conjunction, it was electricity. So I just make that mention. And the client emailed me a few days later, and she was really over the moon. She said, I prayed and then I let it go. I'm going to read you, but she says, I prayed and then I let it go. As I was searching around the house, pondering your info, it started clicking together. 9th house theme, a suitcase from the time I was studying in the UK. So suddenly she starts thinking, I was studying in the UK not too long ago. Mars and electricity. She said that was the clue that really made everything come together. She says, well, guess what? A suitcase in the elevator. And she says in parentheses, we have one in the home, which doesn't quite work because of electricity issues. So now we've got this Mars in Taurus. It's electricity again. When the last time that was electricity, it was Moon Mars and Aries. But now we're dealing with Moon Mars and Taurus, where Mars is debilitated and this electricity, it wasn't working. So this elevator was out of service. But it's now a storage closet. And so there's a suitcase in the elevator full of winter clothes that's just stashed there on the floor, and she'd hidden the jewelry inside and forgotten that she'd done that. I just tossed them aside when putting the winter clothes away. I had wrapped it in a fluffy bathrobe I bought from the States, 9th house theme, and I completely forgot. And when she told me this, that it was involved in an elevator, I mean, the one thing that really just I was like, is this north node right on the midheaven. When you think about elevators, you don't normally think about things that take you down. In elevators, you usually think about the thing that takes you up, because that's the hard part, is getting up the stairs. So, this was like such a dramatic display of this idea of heights and falls and all of that kind of coming together. And you can also get a little bit of this idea, Saturn, on an angle, Moon Mars debilitated, that we might be talking about heavy machinery, things like this, a lot of metal. But I couldn't have judged that, it could have been anything. So I didn't have enough confirming factors to say that preemptively. But if I had seen the nodes, I might have been clever enough to say something about a staircase. I would never have assumed she had an elevator in her house, but she did, and good for her. I hope she gets it fixed one day. All right, so in closing, I just want to remind you that the nodes are not actually that complicated. What we want is just to remember what they are. They are astronomical points that are marking the ascent and descent of the moon's journey as she's circling around the zodiacal circle. So we should be automatically thinking about heights, elevation, great lifting up, great falling down. In electional astrology, if you want to build a building, for instance, if you wanted to say you wanted to break ground and build a new home, you would want to be using the moon in the northern ascent, because what's happening is the moon is raised up, and so it gives this image of the earth, creation coming out of the earth and pulling itself. But if you wanted a demolition, you would be emphasizing the south node and the movement down. And you'd want to use when the moon is on the descending path, because this is about tearing things down, bringing things down. There's also this recognition that we all have base natures. We all have bad habits. We all have things that we wish, like, I wish I wasn't like that. It gives me chills every time I do something like that. And I want to, that's south node. And when you say, I finally took command of that issue, I've changed, I've made a difference, and things are starting to turn around, that is north node. So you are starting to see yourself pull out of and rise above base nature, or sometimes falling back into things that feel convenient. We're dealing with the image of an animal's head and tail. So of course, eating, waste, consumption, purging, all part of the story. But remember that purging isn't only a south node theme. If there's vomiting involved, if you're working with medical astrology, for instance, the north node, it's going to have strong association with, purging through the mouth. Yeah. And then, of course, I think the most reliable thing I can say about the south node is its tendency to relate to falls and mistakes. And inversely with the north node, where we take a risk and put in effort and we are rewarded. I want to remind you that with the north node, that takes effort. It's the south node is super simple, because falling, it takes, sorry, that was probably unnecessarily loud. But when you drop something, gravity does the job for you. Raising something up takes effort, it takes planning, it takes foresight, it takes confidence. So the North Node, working with your North Node builds a tremendous amount of strength, personal strength, emotional strength, psychic strength, so it's worth, if you've got a very strong configuration with the North Node in your life or in your birth chart or in any of your client charts, it might be worth some investigating. A couple of, housekeeping points that I think might be useful for you to know. Focus on what's within a 3-degree orb, what's on angles or conjunct a relevant house cusp. You want to resist the temptation to draw attention where it isn't commanded. Astrology is, there's no end to where you can go. This is one of those arts where it's about the notes you don't play sometimes. It's sometimes just allowing something to stay in the background instead of demanding it gets pulled forward. And then now all we have is a lot of noise, a lot of distraction. We're not really clear what the message or highlight is anymore. We just have a whole bunch of stuff we're struggling to prioritize. Keep your orbs tight. You'll be happy with the results you get. I want to also say aspects to nodes, they are non-events. A sextile to the node, a trine to the node, a square to the node, non-events. The nodes are astronomical points. They are not planets. They do not emit light. They don't change direction in the same, we don't see them. We don't, they shouldn't be treated like planets. They should probably be treated kind of more like a fixed star almost, something like this, where the beginnings of like the equinox points or the solstitial points, that there's a turning thing that's kind of happening at these areas. So, but they're not planets, and we shouldn't expect them to behave like planets. Now, the nodes are going to be more relevant to the luminaries than any of the other planets. And the only, asterisk I would place about this aspect to nodes or non-events, when the moon is at the bendings of the nodes, when the moon is in square to the nodes, that's when she will be at the the most northern or the most southern. So because the nodes are hers, her configuration to the nodes matters. But the other planet, there's no a planet being at the bending of the nodes is not relevant for another planet because there's no meaning for them there. Yes, I did. Yeah, Lori just typed bendings at the same time that I just opened it up. So Jupiter being in square to the nodes is it's like comparing apples and oranges. Those aren't Jupiter's nodes. It doesn't convey any astronomical information for Jupiter to be near the bendings of the nodes. But for the moon to be at the bendings of the nodes, that's relevant because that marks the most extreme in her northern latitude or in her southern latitude. And I can promise you that will be relevant in interpretation. I recently had a consultation where the moon was at the southern bending, where it was at the lowest point, and the interpretation was about this being a very low point. She opened it up saying, I feel like I hit rock bottom, and then you're not surprised to find that she's signified by the moon at the southern bending. It's like, yes, you can see that very clearly in that imagery. I will say, while the nodes are going to be more relevant to the luminaries because they mark the places where their light gets cut off, I also want to say that tight conjunctions with a main significator, like the ascendant ruler, that's worth spending time on. So I don't want to say, but we're conjunctions though. That's what we want to pay attention to. It's a conjunction that we want to emphasize. I am so grateful that you were able to join me today. It was a great discussion, and there's so many of you here. I'm so grateful to have you guys present and supporting my work. If you're interested in studying horary and developing some skill and strength with those techniques, and you haven't studied with us yet, consider the STA horary program. I'd also like to say that I have recently launched my astronomy course through the STA, which I'm very excited about. It's continuing to get redeveloped, lots of changes, and it's growing every time I deliver it. We're about to start a new delivery on Monday, so I guess if you want to join for the one that starts on Monday, you're more than welcome to. But we'll also be offering it again in April. And this website, sta.co/astronomy, it's not updated yet. It still has outdated information, and there's like a link there to put your name on the wait list. If you want to be notified when the next course is advertised, put your name on that wait list. I will be opening that up and pulling the details down from there and contacting you before I, disseminate it publicly to save a space. Yeah, and I guess that concludes. Matthew's asked whether or not I'm doing consultations these days. What's the best way to contact? And just my website there. Sorry, Matthew, I hope it was okay that I read that. I just realized that was a direct message. But and Anna says the astronomy STA site still says 2021. Yes, it's outdated. It needs work, and honestly, I put all my energy into the course and not to the marketing of the course yet. I think that's the right balance. I'd rather work on the course than the marketing, but don't worry about that. Just put your name on the wait list if you want to be notified. And I am doing consultations every day. I have consultations, so more than happy to meet. You can book me through my website. And then our friends asked, am I doing any more webinars? And yes, I'm excited to say that I've got the next one in mind. I'm very excited about it. It will be to celebrate Valentine's Day. We're going to be doing relationship charts. So astrology of relationships and synastry and things like this. I haven't decided yet if I want to do one natal one and one horary one and do that around Valentine's Day, or if I just want to do one webinar on relationships broadly and keep it. Our fund says do both. Well, sign up for both, and then maybe I will. Laura, you've unmuted yourself. Did you have a question?
Because it's not updated on the website, there are people that I know that wanted to sign up for the one that comes next week, and it says that they closed registration last week.
Oh, okay. No, the registration's not closed. Hold on. Let me go ahead and give you the link because there are spaces available. We had some people drop out. And so I do actually have, let me just see, A002. Give me a moment. I can find it. Astronomy, sta.co/ here it is. Yep. All right. So I'll put this here, so if anybody's watching the recording, they can see the web address that they need to enter, but then I'll put it in the chat also. So Lori, if you click on that now, it'll open in your browser, and then anybody can sign up. You've got plenty of time. The material hasn't been really released yet. The students are hooked up so far, so people have access, as you know, but anyway, so that's the link. Thank you guys so much. It's been such a pleasure to have you, and I'm just so grateful for each of you and your ongoing support of my work. I hope you're enjoying the webinar series. I'm going to continue them into this year because I've been having fun with it. It's an opportunity for me to go deep dive on subjects sometimes, and I have a great time seeing all of you when we come together. I hope you enjoy your weekend. Happy birthday to my mother again. And we'll see each other soon, I'm sure. Thanks, guys. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.